As Mark mentioned, he and I first met last December at ITSM UK, where he was talking about DevOps and the intersection of ITIL and DevOps, and that's something that's very close to my heart. I've worked in a lot of companies, consulting, as well as in large enterprises, working with infrastructure teams, service desk teams, and also with development teams, and trying to figure out how to bring a service management culture across the board, across the organization. Those are just some of the places I've worked at. I'm also very passionate about 70s and 80s heavy metal and hard rock, as well as Superman. If anyone wants to talk to me about that after the break, I'd be more than happy to. So, before we start off, I want to share with you a quick anecdote. Up to my university days, I used to live in India. And one day, when I was back home from university, I called up one of my friends, and I said, come over, let's hang out, let's go watch a movie, whatever it was. And he said, great, I'll be right over in my Rolls Royce. And I thought, wow, I knew the guy was rich, but I didn't think he was this rich. And when he showed up, he was in an auto rickshaw. I said, what the heck? I thought you were going to come in a Rolls Royce. And he said, well, it's got a Rolls Royce engine inside, so I call it a Rolls Royce. And when I think about DevOps, and particularly a lot of the conversations I've had about DevOps in larger organizations, it's very much been about a smaller team that's really trying to bring a superior engineering experience, but the customer's experience around that product does not match. So you've got the Rolls Royce inside of a infinitely crappier service. So, DevOps. We typically talk development and operations, and I want to make a distinction here. The operations we typically talk about is technical operations. But as I said, there's a whole service organization around this, and that service organization is trying to orient these activities to deliver customer value outside of just the technology itself. There are teams, and those teams might be the technology teams. We just heard a great talk from the guys at Dynatrace, who are talking about having to do some of the service development and the service operations, writing runbooks, doing some of their operation support themselves. It might be the same team as development, but often more than not, especially in large organizations, there's a separate team doing service development and service operations. And whatever you're doing as developers, whatever we're doing as developers, whether small teams, large teams, we have to be able to orient to make sure that there's a straight line between business coming up with whatever it needs to do to drive more sales and something live in production delivering value for the customer. It's not just about the middle bit, which is the development and the technical operations. So, I want to talk about a few terms, define what I mean by product services. Mark and I were having a bit of a discussion over lunch about the use of the word product, and I'm going to steer very deliberately away from using the word product for now, and I'm going to call it goods. This product has way too many connotations around it. So we talk about physical goods, we talk about digital goods, we talk about services, and usually there's a line between them. There's a separation. We either talk about goods or services. Goods, like I said, hardware, software. You might be in a business where you're selling lawnmowers. You might be part of the website development team. You might be developing SaaS applications. Services, it's typically something that you might rent, subscribe to. That's typically what we associate as services. The next natural question is, well, what exactly is a service? It's sometimes very hard to pin down. Mark mentioned ITIL earlier, and this is, I'm taking from the definition of a service in ITIL to demonstrate what it is we're talking about. And I'd like to do so with a quick example. I want to get a good night's sleep by buying a good mattress to sleep on. I'm able to find a website, a company whose website shows me different options, different prices, different sizes, tells me about delivery times. It allows me to pay for this mattress, and it manages its stock in the warehouse to make sure I'm able to get what I'm buying on time. If I were to use general words for these, I'm able to get a good outcome because I'm able to tap into a service that gives me a value or is beneficial to me. That service has managed costs or provides me with manageable costs, both financial as well as non-financial costs like time spent waiting, time spent to carry my mattress up 3 flights of stairs, whatever it might be. And that service is also managing the risks. Those risks might be stock outages, those risks might be that the website's down, whatever it might be. There are different risks which that service is going to manage. And a service is a combination of these four. It sounds very ephemeral, so I'm going to provide you with a few more examples. And I apologize if I'm rushing. I'm being very cognizant about the time I have, and I have to go through a few slides to get to the good stuff. So, buying digital goods. Fantastica, I love it, right? It allows me to add or remove events, share calendar events with my wife, with the extended family. But I was able to acquire it because the App Store allowed me to search for calendar apps. It allowed me to compare it. It allowed me to read user reviews to make sure I could get the best thing that I wanted. The App Store service allowed me to see what the price was, and again, make a price comparison with other alternative products out there. And of course, the App Store would manage its risks of outages and products not being available, and so on. Sticking with Fantastica, using it to add calendar events, share calendar events, and so on, I get good value out of that. I'm able to manage my schedule. But there are no more associated costs or risks, assuming that the product is good. But I'm not paying for every single calendar event I decide to add, for example. And the last scenario is services related to digital goods. And again, with Fantastica, let's say there's a bug, there's an error, I'm not able to do what I want, and I need someone to be able to fix that for me. Well, the value that the service provider, in this case the company that develops Fantastica, would provide is some sort of tech support. Now, it might not be immediate line to developers, there might be a service desk involved. The costs are just time. I'm not paying for support because that cost was included in the price for which I bought the product. Now, there are some companies out there that charge per service incident. That is also a valid cost model. I'm not saying, there's no right answer here. The risks, of course, of the service, nobody is around, they're closed on weekends, they're closed on public holidays, whatever it might be. So the service that the company has to provide in order to support the product has to combine how they deliver value. Is it human agents on the phone? Is it chatbots? Is it chat lines? Whatever it might be. How long would it take for someone to get through to an agent? And what is the availability? What are the risks that this service could run into? And so the important point is that customer value changes over time. I've worked in, met with, talked to a lot of developers and agile coaches and so on, to whom customer value is defined as the journey in which the customer uses the product. But actually, it changes over time. It could be value from being able to acquire something, it's value from being able to use it, it's value from being able to get support and patches and upgrades, and there could be other scenarios which deliver value. Value is not a singular entity here. And so as developers, whether in large teams, small teams, startups, whatever it might be, we have to think about what is value outside of just the product. And we have to be able to take ownership and accountability for value being delivered outside of just the product being used. We heard earlier from Bern and Alex talking about how they were able to take over some of their operations teams' activities, how they were able to, I think at one point somebody mentioned interacting directly with customer queries and incidents and being able to resolve those. These are all examples of value being generated outside of just the product. And so it's not value from goods or services, it's value from goods and services. And I apologize if this comes across very academic, but it is a very, very important point which a lot of development teams that I've encountered overlook. And to be honest, it's an issue that a lot of service management teams that I've encountered tend to overlook, that they completely ignore the product side of things, or the goods side of things. So goods generate value from being able, from daily use from your customers, but the service allows people to get access to your goods or products, and it allows customers to interact with related services like support, like upgrades, like patches, and so on. And it's this entirety that generates value for your customer, not just the product. And if we accept that fact, then we have to extend the definition of what minimum viable is. We typically talk about minimum viable product. and there is some sort of minimum viable product management that accompanies it. Not everybody's product management techniques and strategies and methods are the same as the next company's. But typically we talk about MVP and some sort of product management to go alongside it. We now have to recognize that there's a MVS, a minimum viable service, and thus a minimum viable service management that needs to accompany the same thing. And just like with MVP and good product management techniques, you can also iterate to the right level of service and the right level of service management. It is entirely dependent on your context. Mark mentioned ITIL before, and those of you who are seasoned ITIL practitioners, or at least been through foundation, would know that one of the key messages in ITIL is adopt and adapt. And that basically means that it's not one size fits all. You have to tailor those capabilities, the specific processes and methods to your organization's context, your customers, your business model. And typically, you'd start where you are, you define reasonably where you want to end up in, and just like with product management and development efforts, you go through sprints. Now those sprints can be the 2-week sprints or 4-week sprints that your development team follows, and typically I would encourage that, but you could choose to follow a different time box window outside of this. I've worked in an environment where every 2 weeks we had to deliver a service management increment. And that was tough. It was a really tough thing to do because service management typically comes from a very waterfall mentality that you've got to work out an end-to-end value chain and then start to deliver segments of that value chain. And it was a real learning lesson for me, at least, to be able to say, well, let's experiment for 2 weeks on introducing a new change type and saying this is going to be a routine change. Let's see how that worked. Did the developers find it was useful? Did the operations people find it was useful? Have the retrospective, get everybody in the room after at the end of the sprint and say, did it work? If it didn't work, throw it away and try something else. But define what it is you're trying to do and then iterate towards that. It's not just for products, it's for services and service management as well. Bern and many other developers talked about change management as being one of their biggest pain points, and I would not disagree. But a very simple way of applying what I just talked about, iterating towards good service management. Let's take the case of change management. Now in ITIL, and I don't think anyone would disagree here, purpose of a good change management system, and by system I don't mean tool, I mean people, processes, methods, etc. The purpose of a good change management system is to enable beneficial changes to live products and services with minimum disruption to the customer. Does anybody disagree with that? Because we're going to have a fight outside, I'm just warning you. Okay.
I would just say something is missing.
Sure.
Something like speed, cycle time.
What is beneficial?
Yeah. It would be good.
So, how do we start that? Well, start off by making changes visible. If nobody knows that things are going to change, how are you making sure that the change is going to be visible? At least tell people that you're going to make a change. From that point, define rules of prioritization. So once you've made changes transparent, open, people know that they're happening, well, what's going to happen if 2 people want to make a change to the same thing at the same time? Who gets priority? How do you make sure that there are guidelines in place so that people can work things out for themselves? Once you've been through a few change cycles, you might say, well, you know what, we don't need this level of scrutiny for every single change of this particular type. They're pre-approved. If you want to make a change of this type, just go ahead, make the change. It's proven to be beneficial, it's proven to be low risk, you're not disrupting the service, just go ahead and make it. Riskier change types, larger change types, we will still maintain some level of oversight, some level of peer reviews and of the change itself, not of the code development process. And at this point, and this is not a mandate, but at this point I'd probably say, well, this is where you're starting to talk about some sort of automation to automatically cut change tickets, automatically approve things or route things to approval and so on. But the key point I'd like to make here is that automation is not the first thing I jumped into, which is typically a lot of what consultants will tell you, especially, is you need to implement this tool, it'll give you all these capabilities. But my point is, go on a learning journey before you automate. Because what will happen is, your out-of-the-box tools, your ServiceNow, Remedy, Jira, whatever it might be, they will typically start somewhere in the middle of that journey. They won't be, I mean, depending on how immature your environment is. You might be over here. If you're very mature already, you might be all the way at the end, and you don't really need any additional automation or external automation tools. But typically, automation will drop you somewhere in the middle of that journey. Excuse me. And what that means is you've now missed all those opportunities to learn from making mistakes or doing things the correct way. And you're being forced to take on whatever it is that tool is giving you. So instead of that, I would say go on the journey. Again, Bernd and Alex had a really great example where they started off with emailing spreadsheets and manually marking up spreadsheets, all the way through to building out a tool for themselves. They went on that journey and they decided, well, you know what, out-of-the-box automation isn't the right tool. They didn't go out and buy the automation, they built it in-house. But they didn't build it at this point. They went on a learning journey to find out what was valuable before they built it. So it's the same concept. Learn, then automate. And that's a mistake that a lot of people tend to fall into. So, how am I doing on time? Okay. I was at DevOps Enterprise Summit last year, and one of the things that I heard time and again is, you know, it's great to talk about DevOps and ITIL and how they all align together, but a lot of what I've seen is theoretical. It's academic. How exactly should I align my existing ITIL or IT service management capabilities to what my DevOps engineers are trying to do? And so I came up with some slides to try to answer that. And when Mark invited me and the TopConf team invited me to talk here, I thought it would be good to share some of these slides with you to hopefully give you some ideas to take back into your own organizations and help other people in your organization come on the same journey. A couple of points of fine print. The first is I am going to draw from ITIL. AXELOS, the company I work for, are the owners of ITIL. I'm part of the ITIL development team. So when I talk about service management, yes, I recognize that it's more than just ITIL, but I'm going to confine the next few slides to very strictly ITIL and ITIL definitions. The second disclaimer is I'm going to use Gene's framework of the 3 ways as a way to describe the things that happen in DevOps. It's not the only way to describe what DevOps is, but I find it a useful framework within which to describe various activities: development, operations, service management, cultural, and so on. So I'm going to combine ITIL and Gene's 3 ways to demonstrate how the alignment can take place. So the overriding question that we all need to ask ourselves as developers, as service management professionals is, does my product team or my digital goods team, does that capability to deliver something align with my service organization's ability to manage it? So we were talking, Alex and I think were talking about at lunch, no, over breakfast, about such an increased rate of change of a product that the business organization could not keep up. And we were talking about feature flags. That's a really good example of this. The question there would be, does the development team's capability to deliver incremental changes align with the service organization's ability to manage or release those changes to customers? It's not one and the same thing. So, when we talk about development, does my development team's methods to test code, to release or deploy code align with the service organization's needs to test the service, to release the products to their customers as a service? On an ops side, does my technical operations team's ability to manage telemetry, to manage operational capacity of storage, software licenses, whatever it might be, does that align with the service capability to manage capacity? One thing I see time and again is that the service might have defined that they want to be able to handle 10,000 customers concurrently. But does your technical capacity allow you to be able to do that? In the flow from dev to ops, the first way is the service change management, is the service configuration management, and I'll get to that in a point, and is the ability to transfer knowledge aligned with how the service organization does these things. Because there's no point if there's a misalignment, if the service organization depends on release notes or FAQs or whatever it might be, and you're not doing that, then there's an immediate misalignment. Now, with configuration management, in a service context, it's about how service assets relate to each other. So it's not about making sure the same code base is deployed. It's not just about making sure that the same code is deployed to all servers. It's about tying in that relationship between code, the server it sits on, the database it talks to, the business outcomes it supports, making sure that whole thing is aligned with whatever you're doing at a more technical level. There's also one more point, which Gene does discuss in the Phoenix project, and I think Bernd and Alex talked about this earlier, which is making sure that operations are delivering production-like environments and the access to those production-like environments to your development team at the start of every sprint. In ITIL terms, we talk about request management, we talk about access management, typically creating a good service catalog where developers can use self-service to request development environments to be spun up. These are all described in a lot of the ITIL guidance. The feedback loop is operations' ability to escalate incidents aligned with how the service organization sees incident management running. Is the operations team ability to investigate causes of these incidents aligned with what the service organization will call problem management. And then when it comes to continuous improvement, well, guess what? The service organization is also undertaking continuous service activity. At least a good service organization is always constantly trying to improve the way it's delivering its services to the customer. Is the way you're changing development methods in your teams and operations methods in your teams aligning with what the service is trying to achieve in terms of its continuous improvements. There is a role called service operations, a set of teams called service operations. Typically, we might call that the service desk. They're the people who pick up the phones, answer customer queries, deal with customer issues, and so on. And so are you providing them with the information they need to do that? Are you giving them FAQs? Are you giving them support scripts so that if somebody calls in, they're able to capture the information quickly, easily, consistently? Are you publishing release notes so customers can see what's changed? How are service operations able to escalate requests, issues, incidents back into your DevOps teams? They may have their own incident management process. You may have something completely different, and they're misaligned. Customer queries can go unanswered for days. I had an issue where I bought an email application from the Mac App Store, and 2 minutes in, I ran into a showstopper. It wasn't a bug, it was a lack of a feature. It was a showstopper for me. And I contacted the support team. And what they said is, well, make the suggestion that you want this feature, we'll get to it whenever we can. As a paying customer, that is not an answer I want to hear. There should have been a way for the service desk, that service operations engineer, to have escalated my issue to the development team to get a better answer than, whenever, right? And similarly, service operations may need to escalate requests directly to developers, especially when it comes to feature requests from customers. Again, continuous improvement. The service operations team is also trying to continuously improve. How are you part of that journey? Last but not least, and I promise this will all make sense in a moment, there's something called service design in ITIL. It's not called service development, and I can tell you it's a big annoyance to me. But service design is typically where your architects talk about capacity management, availability, security, disaster recovery. In the cloud, that might have less relevance, but guess what? There are enough people in traditional data centers to whom this sort of stuff still matters and matters a lot. How are they sending you performance requirements? Is the service performance requirements matching the way you are architecting your applications, you are architecting your technical services? Similarly, are you sending performance information back to that organization to say, this is how, we're realizing that we're running out of capacity every 30 days during a peak cycle of business activity. So what can we do about that? Are you sending that sort of performance data back to your service organization to say something needs to change? Is your technical operations team able to send performance information back as well? It's not just development performance information, but it's also technical operations. And again, continuous improvement is the way the service design team, the service design roles interact with your developers, aligning with how the service needs to operate. Put all that together, we can come up with a pretty picture. The business, somebody mentioned, business hands-off requirements. Yes, that still happens. Business hands-off requirements to a service design organization. Service design organization will work with your development team to build out the architectural constraints in which development must take place. Development will work with ops. Technical ops will work with service ops to make sure customers are able to be supported. Service ops works with the customer or the end user. Ultimately, that whole loop is a way for the business to transfer value to the customer. That's your loop. And within that loop, hands up, who here is familiar with theory of constraints? If you're in DevOps, I'd imagine, okay, I would encourage you to go read the Phoenix Project at least. In the context of this loop, just focusing on improving flow, feedback, and improvement between dev and ops will create a constraint in your system. It'll mean that you're either starved of requirements or outcomes that you need to develop against, or it'll mean that you're pushing things too fast for service operations and the customers to handle. So you've got to optimize to make sure flow and feedback is optimized across the whole loop, not just in development and operations. I apologize if that was very theoretical, but before, and I have rushed through it because of time, but before I leave you with the key takeaways, any questions? Okay, so first one, value has many definitions. It changes over time. Second, just as you iterate towards minimum viable product, you need to iterate towards minimum viable service and minimum viable service management. Be aware of the wider context. If you're only going to focus on how development and operations can be more efficient, you will ultimately become less effective. And last but not least, we all want to be driving that Rolls Royce, not that rickshaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Bernd. I'll give you the mic.
Thanks. So great talk. So I did like kind of this entire thought about the services team and how this maps into DevOps. One of our today's challenges is how we actually also bring the services team, professional services, tech support, account management, and customer success management, who are all siloed today, closer into this whole DevOps world.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you have any experience actually in bringing those silos, or kind of totally dismantling those silos, bringing people from those roles into a unified team?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And sort of do growth hacking from there, cross-cutting?
I've got the mic. So yes, it's a really good question. It's something I see a lot in especially growing teams and growing organizations, large enterprises where you might have a legacy service desk team, a legacy incident management team, and so on. What I've done is to extend my product development team to include somebody who knows at least what the language of that service organization would be. So there's an interface between my development team and the service organization, and that person can speak incident, problem, change, capacity, availability, finance, whatever it might be. The other thing that I've also done is to split my development team so that some of its operational capacity is available for incidents, bug fixes, and so on. It means deliberately lowering how much you can commit to from a sprint to sprint, but you're essentially reserving some of that time. And what we did, for example, was, again, we iterated to see what would be the right solution. So the first time it was people can email this one person if they have an issue with the platform that we're developing. From then, we iterated to, well, maybe he should email a mailbox so everybody sees when the emails come in. But these developers who have assigned tasks, assigned stories to work on, they continue to work. It's still that primary point. But everybody is aware that there's an incident, so they can swarm if needed. He can call out for help if needed. Or if what they're doing, what they're developing may cause further degradation of the service because of that issue that's been identified, then they're aware of that issue and they're able to stop their work, see what the problem is, and reprioritize what they need to work on. But yes, I think there needs to be a wider movement where development teams extend beyond just technical development and talk about service development as well, and service operations. So it's not just tech dev and tech ops, it's service development and service ops, and both of them need to be part of the same team. Hope that helps. Thanks. Good question. Any other questions? Mark?
Yeah, a question for the audience, really. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, question for the audience. You mentioned the DevOps handbook. I'd like to ask how many people have read the DevOps handbook. Okay, just a very, very small minority. Worthwhile reading, because if you look at the credibility of the authors, I think if you're looking for a credible source of guidance, that is certainly something to take seriously. So
one of the things I really, good point. One of the things I really like about the DevOps handbook is it does get a little bit prescriptive. It does tell you about some of the specific techniques and methods, not just in development and operations, but also in cultural change, in financial forecasting, whatever it might be, and it's supplemented with a lot of good business cases, not just from the unicorns of Silicon Valley, but also from a lot of smaller shops who have gone through that same journey. So yeah, very good point, Mark. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. You can shout it out, I guess. By the way, Bern, on I think page 10 of DevOps handbook, one of the myths that they have there is DevOps is not NoOps. So you might want to take a look at that.
Interesting talk, thank you. I have a question. Do you have any good example or success story of removing silos between different tools that different teams use? So there's a service desk, there's Jira, there's something for roadmaps, some Excels for business people. Thank you.
It's a really good question, and I'm going to provide a not such a great answer, which is it depends. It depends on your business context. It depends on what challenges your business is trying to solve. Again, if I mention tools, it's not plugs for those tools. It's just tools that I've encountered that seem to solve the problem. I've seen ServiceNow play a really good role in trying to bridge various teams from across the enterprise. Yes, it started out as a service desk and incident and change management tool, but then it slowly started moving into helping software development be part of that service organization. Most software development shops I've been to are still married to Jira, and Atlassian is trying to move into the service desk side. So they're also trying to bridge that same gap. I've come across places where literally it was Excel spreadsheets because that was all that was required. There is, I think, a wider issue that needs to be solved, which is how do you bring people like finance and project management along a DevOps journey so that they can understand that there's a different way of planning, budgeting, of managing risks, of delivering outcomes that the business wants, but in a more agile way. I think that's the bigger challenge that these tool vendors are still trying to come to grips with and solve.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. There's a community that goes under the name of the IT4IT Forum, who have recognized this topic of the poor interoperability between IT service management tooling. Is part of the open group, and they've developed an architecture, and you can see it in the name, IT4IT, the information and information systems that the IT function needs to do its job to run IT as a business. That might be worth taking a look at, IT4IT.
Absolutely.
I think we're good for coffee now.